Nice.
Myron's?
Mr. Kimpton's going to introduce this item with Mr. Bodman.
Sorry.
Hang on. Well, maybe introduce it and then the local boards can come forward and make their presentation.
Or do we...
Sorry, Councillor, do you want the presentations made first, did you say?
The local boards, do you want to come forward now? Okay? Okay, thanks. We'll do that. Okay. So we have, what, 4 local boards? Thank you.
And the support of others in the wings. You can kick off.
That's all right. Thank you. And we're in your hands, Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fito is going to start off for us.
Cool. Thanks, Chair and Committee again. So we wanted to outline the discussions, firstly the overview of how the discussions have been for local boards, in particular around empowered communities. I think there is general support of the rationale of the empowered communities approach, which is to firstly understand that community development sits at the heart of the work that local boards undertake, and they're keen to ensure that we get this approach right. There's widespread support for empowering communities and understanding that this will enable the organisation to assist us in ensuring that communities are able to get their work done, taking away any impediments that might be in place at present so that they can really engage. And finally, we'd also like to acknowledge that iterate that a review of the implementation will be important, and its evaluation and monitoring framework will be a key element to ensuring that this is in fact that the operationalisation of the rationale is in fact meeting the hopes and aspirations of local boards. The other thing I'd like to just touch on is that we're clear on the idea that one size does not fit all. And we've had a number of discussions about how community development and what organisations are used or utilised in different parts of our city. And it's important that we understand that we need to make sure we get a fit-for-purpose local approach for each of these local areas. So in some areas it might be an organisation is brought in by a local board and they run community development or ensure that community development happens. In other areas there's multiple organisations that are working on community development in the area. So we want to make sure that as part of our understanding and making and operationalising this rationale of empowering communities, that we get the actual work right. And accessing the Community Practice Hub and the skills described in paragraph 26 of your report could add to greater flexibility if the mechanisms of how the hub will support local initiatives are clarified. So we want to be clear as local boards on what this is going to look like, and that's an important part of the next step that we need to understand.
I just have a couple of other items that we'd like to talk about. In particular, paragraph 9 summarises that local boards have concerns around the implementation plans, budgets, governance and accountability support for community organisations. Local boards have endorsed the approach, but the final detail of the approach we haven't fully endorsed as yet. And many of the local boards were not aware that there was absolutely no funding coming to local board level in the first year when this was first proposed to us. And our concern is that with no resources in particular in 2015-16, it makes it extremely difficult for those local boards that are taking the steps for the first time into empowered community-led development when you require enough resource to be able to grant an organisation who is going to lead something sufficient funding to actually get it off the ground. that makes it very, very difficult indeed. And we do realise that there is funding coming through in 2016-17, but that is actually less than 1.6. It's 1.2 is what we've been told at this stage. And that really is quite a small amount when you start to add it up across 21 local boards. We also, given that the proposal also provides for strategic broker roles, rather than staff who are currently delivering community development initiatives, and the budget situation puts delivery at risk because we don't actually have a resourced delivery mechanism in place for the first 12 months, other than what the local boards may do independently. And so there is a large number of local boards that will be doing a lot of this for the first time. And so there is a risk that this will be very slow in this first 12 months. The actual report talks a lot about resourcing. In fact, I think it's mentioned in 10 paragraphs, but actually nothing is being resourced to the local boards in the first year at all. So that needs to be considered as to how effective that will be. We would also like to ask then that perhaps consideration be given to exploring the greater LTP budget overall to see whether or not there can be some additional funding put forward. It may be in the order of about 1.6, would actually only be $80,000 a local board, but that could be quite a reasonable start for the first year of work in this particular area. We also would like to flag that we know that locally driven initiatives local boards are working with at this stage, and in particular we're hearing all sorts of rumours that come out as per normal with change. But we would put the flag up and say that we really think that local boards should be allowed to reserve discretionary funding if that is required to do some work towards this work, because it's very hard to respond when you don't have a discretionary fund that's adequate. And some may not have adequate, but they do all want to reserve something that is reasonable. The other point that I'd like to raise also is the governance and accountability of third-party organisations in particular. And moving to the empowered communities approach brings risks, and support for robust governance and accountability mechanisms is important and a very important resource for actually the delivery model. And work definitely needs to continue to progress in that area so that when the opportunities come forward, we are able to adequately resource the organisations to get them started and get them effective. Thank you very much.
Speak.
Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to speak. I'd just like to elaborate one particular point which arises out of what my colleagues have already said, which is the provision in the report for a review of, quote, progress, unquote. And I just begin by noting that when I worked in the Beehive, progress was one of those words like significant that I would use to gloss over things because it really doesn't mean anything except what you want it to. So I would argue that there is need for more specificity in respect of the review of the approach that we're about to embark upon, because it is, as everybody has noted, a major shift into what is in our region an unknown, which entails a great deal of change. So we do need to be very careful about what we review and when we review it. Now, the particular concern that I have, for instance, is that retaining the strategic brokers within the community development unit, whatever it is to be called, will work in some areas, but it won't in others. There will be variation in the degree to which the brokers are able to work as they should. And remember, as my colleagues have stressed, working with the community is bread and butter stuff for local boards. It's integral. It's a key part of what we do, and the strategic broker role is a key to it working. Without, if the strategic broker role doesn't work, then the whole thing doesn't work. So I would argue the strategic broker ideally should be integrated into the local board services organisation at the local level. Sometimes it will work, partly because of historical associations, as is the case in Rodney at the moment, but in other cases it won't work, as CDAC often doesn't work in many local boards, including my own. Because there are things like conflicts between regional priorities and the local priorities. I note some local boards have suggested that local boards should have input into choosing who's in this critical role, but I think the problems will come when it comes to things like performance management and regional managers, and I appreciate there'll be some, hopefully, change in practice, but we see regional managers about once every 3 months at the moment. Regional managers with no understanding of what the local board's about, what its priorities are and so on, not being particularly cognizant of local board needs when it comes to allocating staff around the place, that sort of thing. There will be problems, there will be variation, and we will need sooner rather than later to look at how the approach is working in practice. There are many practical issues we can't actually foresee easily at the moment. So I would suggest that B be altered to be more specific, and rather than progress, you put something like outcome, structure and operation, so that we're covering everything, and we can be sure that everything will be reviewed so that we can be more confident that this approach will succeed, because everybody here is absolutely committed to it succeeding. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Oh, sorry.
I'd just like to amplify a couple of the key points that have been made and suggest a couple of recommended additional recommendations. If endorsed community is not going to be just a grandiose title, but to be as meaningful as we're all wanting to see it, it comes at a cost. And I don't think that cost has been factored in sufficiently. You've heard Kay speak about this, that the actual additional funding doesn't come in for another year, yet the costs, the start-up costs, can be significant. And we would like to see this model truly work for everyone. Now, in some communities, they might be more empowered than others by actual the way that they've been set up. Our local boards in the north have had to adapt and adopt a model. But it's really hard for other areas of the Auckland region to actually see the transition and changes that they're going to have to make from a largely staff-delivered model to a community group-delivered model. And I think there's a lot of cynicism about that, whether they're going to be truly empowered. So we'd suggest that we have a C and a D, and the C state that ensure the transition maintains delivery of local board work programs and local initiatives, noting the intent to move from a delivery model to one of a more strategic nature without having a negative impact on local board budgets. And a D, to seek to find further funding of 1.6 million and resources which can be released either through the long-term plan, transition costs, or other operational sources to assist and fund locally facing initiatives. Now, we believe that that would satisfy some of the concerns that we have, and we hope whoever moves these recommendations does consider moving our suggested C and D, so that no local board will be disadvantaged financially in trying to introduce this significant new model.
Happy to move those.
No, I'm sorry, I'm going to move the original motion. So we haven't got that on the floor yet. We're still in the process of hearing the local board, so we're not moving motions at the moment.
So, Mr Chairman, would it be helpful if we gave those two suggested additional parts to the motion to your democracy advisor, so that people can actually see it up there and actually see the intent and the wording that we're
I think
suggesting?
When the deputation finishes, I'll ask Mr Kimpton to comment on those issues that you've raised. Thank you.
Well, it might be just helpful just for people to actually see it, Mr Chairman.
Councillor, Mrs Parfitt.
I'll call you Mr Mayor then.